The hum of the airport was a symphony of muffled announcements, rolling suitcases, and the occasional burst of laughter from passengers eager to reach their destinations. At the private terminal, where luxury jets lined the tarmac, the air was charged with a different kind of energy, one of exclusivity and quiet privilege. Among the polished marble floors and leather-bound seating, all eyes turned toward the woman walking in, her stride confident and her head held high. Alyssa Carter was no stranger to commanding attention, though she seldom sought it. She was dressed simply but elegantly, a tailored blazer and slacks that spoke to her professionalism without screaming it. Her natural curls framed her face, exuding a quiet power that turned heads wherever she went. At 34, Alyssa was already a trailblazer, one of the youngest executives in the aviation industry, overseeing operations for a fleet of private jets that catered to high-profile clients. Yet, to many, her presence in such a space felt out of place, an unfortunate truth she had learned to navigate with poise. As she approached the check-in desk, the receptionist greeted her with a polite but somewhat hesitant smile, her eyes darting toward the screen in front of her. Alyssa handed over her credentials with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before, expecting a smooth process. But something in the receptionist's expression shifted, an almost imperceptible flicker of doubt. "Ma'am," the receptionist began, her tone carefully measured, "can I confirm the purpose of your travel today?" Alyssa raised an eyebrow, slightly amused, but not surprised. "I'm here for a meeting with the pilot," she said simply. "I'm the regional operations director." The receptionist's polite smile froze in place, as though she hadn't heard correctly. "I see," she said, glancing at Alyssa again, this time with a subtle scrutiny that spoke volumes. She typed something into her computer, then hesitated before saying, "If you could wait just a moment, I'll need to confirm something." Alyssa nodded, her expression unreadable. She stepped aside, pulling out her phone to check emails while she waited. Moments like these weren't new to her. They were an unfortunate reality of being both a woman and black in an industry dominated by older white men. She had learned to steel herself against the microaggressions, the questioning looks, and the undercurrent of disbelief that often accompanied her achievements. Today, however, she felt a slight pang of irritation. She had a tight schedule, and unnecessary delays were the last thing she needed. As the minutes ticked by, Alyssa noticed a shift in the atmosphere around her. A man in a sharp suit had entered the terminal and was speaking animatedly with the receptionist, his eyes occasionally darting toward Alyssa. It didn't take long for her to piece together what was happening. The man approached her, his expression a mix of politeness and authority. "Excuse me, ma'am," he began, his tone bordering on patronizing. "Are you sure you're in the right terminal? This area is restricted to passengers and crew members." Alyssa felt the weight of every eye in the room on her. She took a deep breath, suppressing the frustration that bubbled just beneath the surface. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she replied calmly. "I have a meeting with the pilot. Is there an issue?" The man hesitated, clearly unsure how to proceed. "It's just that. We need to verify your credentials. Security is very strict here, as I'm sure you understand." Alyssa's lips curved into a tight smile. She could play the game if she had to, but the sheer absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on her. "Of course," she said, handing over her ID and credentials once more. "Take all the time you need." The man took the documents and walked back to the receptionist, leaving Alyssa standing alone. She could feel the eyes of other passengers lingering on her, some curious, others skeptical. It was a feeling she had experienced countless times before, a silent interrogation that demanded she prove she belonged in spaces where people like her were so often excluded. Minutes later, the man returned, his expression a shade more formal. "Thank you for your patience," he said, handing back her documents. "But before we proceed, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside." Alyssa blinked, her calm exterior threatening to crack. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady but edged with disbelief. "It's just a precaution," the man explained, his tone overly rehearsed. We need to confirm everything with the pilot before you can board. For a moment, the room seemed to freeze. Alyssa could feel her pulse quicken, but she kept her composure. She looked the man directly in the eye and said, "You might want to do that, because if you spoke to the pilot, you'd realize I'm not just a passenger. I'm their boss." The man's confident facade faltered, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the sound of approaching footsteps filled the terminal. Heads turned as the pilot entered the room, their crisp uniform and commanding presence immediately drawing attention. The pilot's eyes locked onto Alyssa, and a smile spread across their face. "Miss Carter," the pilot said warmly, extending a hand. "I've been waiting for you. Shall we head to the plane?" The man's jaw visibly dropped, and the receptionist's face turned an unmistakable shade of red. Alyssa resisted the urge to smirk. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, shook the pilot's hand, and said, "Let's." As they walked toward the plane, leaving the stunned terminal staff behind, Alyssa couldn't help but feel a mix of vindication and exhaustion. This was the reality of her world, a constant battle to prove she deserved to be in spaces she had already earned her place in. But as she stepped onto the jet, she reminded herself of why she fought so hard to break these barriers. For every girl who looked like her, dreaming of flying planes or running companies, she knew she had to keep going. And today, she had one more story to prove it. Alyssa settled into one of the plush leather seats aboard the jet, her exterior calm and composed, though her mind was still buzzing with the encounter in the terminal. The polished surfaces of the cabin reflected her image back at her, poised, professional, and unbothered. She had mastered this look, the kind that said, "I'm in control," even when she felt anything but. It wasn't just about appearances, it was survival. The pilot, Captain James Daniels, closed the cockpit door before sitting across from her. He gave her an apologetic smile, the kind that spoke volumes without words. James had been with the company for nearly a decade, and they developed a strong professional bond over the years. He had seen firsthand the way Alyssa had transformed the organization, making it not just profitable, but innovative in an industry often resistant to change. "That was something, huh?" James finally said, breaking the silence. Alyssa let out a soft laugh, but there wasn't much humor in it. Something indeed. You'd think by now they'd have figured out who signs the checks. James shook his head, a shadow of frustration crossing his face. People see what they want to see, and sometimes they can't see past their own biases. Alyssa leaned back, crossing her arms as she stared out the window. Beyond the pristine glass, the world stretched wide and endless, a reminder of just how far she'd come, and how far there still was to go. Her journey hadn't been easy. Growing up in a modest neighborhood in Atlanta, she'd fallen in love with aviation at a young age. Her father, a retired Air Force mechanic, used to take her to watch planes take off and land at the local airport. He'd explain the mechanics of flight with a twinkle in his eye, turning each lesson into an adventure. "You can be anything you want," he'd always tell her, and she believed him. But believing wasn't always enough. When she expressed her dream of becoming a pilot or working in aviation, the responses ranged from dismissive to outright discouraging. Teachers suggested more practical careers. Peers laughed, calling her dreams far-fetched. But Alyssa was stubborn. She excelled in school, earning scholarships and eventually landing a job with a major airline after college. She worked her way up, navigating the labyrinth of corporate aviation, always aware of the invisible barriers people rarely talked about. Even when she wasn't the youngest person in the room, she was often the only woman, and almost always the only Black woman. That reality had shaped her into the person she was today, sharp, relentless, and unapologetic. But it hadn't erased the sting of moments like the one in the terminal, where her competence and authority were questioned before she even had a chance to speak. James studied her for a moment before speaking again. "You know, they're going to feel pretty foolish when they realize who you are." Alyssa gave a small shrug, her expression unreadable. "It's not about them feeling foolish. It's about the fact that this keeps happening. And not just to me. It's systemic. It's exhausting. James nodded, his face thoughtful. You're right, but you're changing things, Alyssa. Whether they admit it or not, you're forcing people to rethink what they thought they knew about who belongs in this space. Alyssa smiled faintly. She appreciated James' support, but she also knew how slow change could be. It wasn't just about breaking down doors, it was about making sure they stayed open for the people who came after her. The hum of the jet engines filled the cabin as the plane began taxiing down the runway. Alyssa let the rhythm steady her thoughts. She had meetings to focus on, a new project to oversee, and a reputation to uphold. But still, her mind wandered back to the terminal, to the lingering stares and hesitant words. The thing was, she didn't entirely blame the staff. Their reaction, while frustrating, was a symptom of a larger issue, one that was deeply ingrained in the culture of aviation and beyond. People made assumptions based on appearances, and those assumptions shaped the way they treated others. As the plane lifted off, Alyssa felt the familiar rush of takeoff, a momentary weightlessness that always reminded her why she loved this industry. The view from above was different, clearer, more expansive. Up here, the world felt limitless. James' voice broke through her thoughts. You've got that look again. What look? The one you get when you're about to do something big. Alyssa chuckled, shaking her head. Maybe I am. Maybe it's time for another initiative, something to push the conversation forward. This isn't just about me. It's about changing the narrative for everyone who's been told they don't belong. James grinned. Whatever you're planning, count me in. You've got a whole team behind you, Alyssa. Don't forget that. She nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The challenges she faced weren't insurmountable. They were opportunities to educate, to innovate, and to lead by example. But there was something else nagging at the back of her mind, a lingering question she couldn't quite shake. Why had the man in the terminal seemed so sure she didn't belong? Was it just a case of mistaken identity, or was there something more to it? The memory of his expression, part confusion, part suspicion, stayed with her as the jet soared through the clouds. She couldn't help but wonder if this was just another example of unconscious bias, or if it was indicative of a deeper issue within the organization. As the flight continued, Alyssa found herself replaying the interaction in her mind, dissecting every detail. She made a mental note to follow up on the incident, not just to address her own experience, but to ensure it didn't happen to anyone else. For now, though, she focused on the task at hand. She had a vision for the future of aviation, one where diversity wasn't just a buzzword, but a fundamental part of the industry's DNA. And she wasn't about to let anyone or anything stand in her way. The jet began its descent, and Alyssa braced herself for the next phase of her journey. She didn't know what challenges awaited her on the ground, but one thing was certain: she was ready to face them head-on. Because Alyssa Carter didn't just belong in this space, she was here to redefine it. The jet touched down smoothly, the engines quieting as the plane taxied to its designated spot on the tarmac. Alyssa's mind was still spinning, replaying the events of the morning as she prepared to step into her next set of challenges. The city outside the window glimmered with the bustle of opportunity, yet she felt the faint weight of unease pressing on her chest. As the cabin door opened, Alyssa adjusted her blazer, a subtle reminder to herself to walk out with the confidence she knew she deserved. James gave her a reassuring nod before she descended the steps onto the tarmac, where a black car was already waiting to whisk her to the company's regional headquarters. The drive was uneventful, the city's skyline blurring into a mix of glass and steel. Alyssa's phone buzzed continuously, emails and messages flooding in with updates, requests, and questions. She responded to a few, her fingers flying across the screen, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the terminal. Something about the man's insistence didn't sit right with her. It wasn't just the skepticism in his tone, it was the way he seemed almost prepared, like he was expecting her not to belong. At the headquarters, the day unfolded in a whirlwind of back-to-back meetings. Alyssa moved seamlessly through them, her presence commanding a room even when the subtle undercurrents of doubt lingered. In a strategy session with department heads, she laid out plans for a new initiative aimed at increasing access to aviation careers for underrepresented groups. "This isn't just about ticking diversity boxes," she said firmly, scanning the room. "It's about building an industry that reflects the world we live in. We need fresh perspectives, new voices, and talent from every corner of society. That's how we innovate." Most nodded in agreement, though a few exchanged hesitant glances. Alyssa caught them but didn't address it. She was used to resistance, even when her ideas led to undeniable results. The challenge was convincing people to embrace change before it became inevitable. As the meeting wrapped up, one of her colleagues, Marcus, lingered behind. He was one of the few people Alyssa trusted implicitly, a sharp thinker and someone who understood the nuances of the battles she fought daily. "You seemed a little on edge today," Marcus said, leaning against the conference table. Alyssa sighed, glancing at her watch. "It's been a morning," she admitted. "There was an incident at the terminal. Nothing new, but it felt different. Off somehow." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" She hesitated, unsure how to articulate the nagging feeling. "It wasn't just the usual questioning of whether I belonged there. It was the way the guy handled it, like he already had an answer in his head and was looking for an excuse to justify it." Marcus frowned, his expression shifting to one of concern. "You think it was personal?" "I don't know," Alyssa admitted, "but I can't shake the feeling that there's more to it." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Want me to look into it?" Alyssa hesitated. She didn't want to overreact or read too much into a single interaction, but at the same time, her instincts were rarely wrong. "Yeah," she said finally. "See if you can find out who he was. And check if there's been any chatter about me or the company lately. Something doesn't feel right." Marcus gave her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "You've got it. Don't let it eat at you too much, though. You've got enough on your plate as it is." Alyssa smiled faintly. "Thanks, Marcus. I owe you one." As the day wore on, Alyssa tried to focus on her work, but the unease lingered. By the time she returned to her hotel that evening, she felt a mix of exhaustion and restlessness. She ordered room service and sat by the window, watching the city lights twinkle against the night sky. Her phone buzzed with a call from James. "Hey," she said, her voice lighter than she felt. "What's up?" "Just wanted to check in," James said. "I know today started off rough." Alyssa appreciated the gesture. "Thanks. It's nothing I haven't dealt with before, but I don't know. It got under my skin this time." James hesitated on the other end of the line. "You think it's something more than just the usual nonsense?" "Maybe," Alyssa admitted. "Marcus is looking into it. I'm probably overthinking, but I can't let it go." James's tone turned serious. "You trust your gut, Alyssa. It's gotten you this far." She smiled, feeling a little more grounded. "Thanks, James. I needed that." They chatted for a few more minutes before hanging up. Alyssa set her phone down, staring out at the skyline. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, though she knew it was likely just her overactive imagination. The next morning, Marcus called with an update. "I dug around," he said, his tone cautious. "The guy at the terminal, his name's David Harrington. He's not just some random employee. He's connected, comes from old money, has ties to a lot of the higher-ups in the industry. And get this, there's been some chatter about him pushing for changes in leadership at the company." Alyssa's stomach tightened. "Changes in leadership? What does that mean?" "It's not clear," Marcus said, "but it sounds like he's trying to position himself, or someone close to him, for a major role. And let's just say you being in charge doesn't exactly fit into his vision." Alyssa felt a flash of anger, but she tamped it down. "So this wasn't just about me being at the wrong terminal. He was trying to undermine me." "Looks that way," Marcus said. "But don't worry. He's playing a dangerous game, and you've got the track record to shut it down." Alyssa nodded, though her mind was already racing. If David Harrington thought he could push her out, he had another thing coming. She wasn't just here to hold a seat at the table, she was here to make sure the table itself was built to last. But as she ended the call and prepared for the day ahead, Alyssa couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. There were bigger battles ahead, and she'd have to be ready for whatever came next. Alyssa paced her hotel room, the floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the glow of the city's skyline behind her. The call with Marcus had given her clarity, but also left her uneasy. This wasn't just about one man's arrogance or an isolated incident. It was about power, who held it, who wanted it, and what they were willing to do to get it. Her phone buzzed again, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from Marcus. *, you might want to check your email. Things are moving faster than I thought. *. Alyssa opened her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys as she logged into her work account. Sitting in her inbox was a forwarded chain of emails that Marcus had uncovered, messages sent between David Harrington and other influential figures in the aviation world. As she skimmed through the correspondence, her heart sank. The emails painted a picture of a coordinated effort to discredit her leadership. Subtle comments about her inexperience and inability to navigate the complexities of the industry were peppered throughout. One message even suggested that her focus on diversity initiatives was a distraction from the company's profitability. Alyssa clenched her jaw, her pulse quickening. It wasn't just an attack on her. It was an attack on everything she stood for. The progress she had made, the doors she had worked so hard to open, the lives she had changed. It was all being reduced to a talking point in someone else's power play. Marcus had attached a note to the email. *, looks like Harrington's been pulling strings for a while. He's got a few board members on his side, but not all of them. If he's going to make a move, it'll be soon. You need to be ready. Ready. Alyssa stared at the screen, her mind racing. How could she be ready for something like this? She had spent her entire career proving herself, rising above the doubts and stereotypes, but now it felt like she was being forced to fight a battle she shouldn't even have to face. She took a deep breath, willing herself to focus. She had faced adversity before, and she wasn't about to back down now. She grabbed her phone and dialed Marcus. "We need to strategize," she said as soon as he picked up. "I figured you'd say that," Marcus replied. "I've already started compiling a list of people who can vouch for you. Other executives, industry leaders, even some employees who've benefited from your initiatives. If Harrington wants to play politics, we'll play too." Alyssa nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Good. Let's make sure we're prepared for anything he throws at us. And Marcus, thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'd be fine," Marcus said with a chuckle. "But I'm glad to have your back." The next few days were a blur of activity. Alyssa and Marcus worked late into the nights, assembling their case and rallying support. Alyssa reached out to allies across the industry, carefully navigating the delicate balance of protecting her position without tipping her hand too early. Meanwhile, Harrington's presence seemed to loom larger with every passing hour. He was charming and well-connected, the kind of man who knew how to work a room and say all the right things. But Alyssa knew there was more to him than his polished exterior. He was calculating, ruthless, and clearly determined to see her fail. The tension came to a head at a high-profile industry event later that week. The room was filled with executives, investors, and key decision-makers, all the people who had the power to shape the future of aviation. Alyssa had been invited to speak on a panel about innovation and leadership, a topic she was passionate about. But as she scanned the crowd, her eyes landed on Harrington, who was deep in conversation with two board members from her company. Her stomach tightened, but she pushed the feeling aside. She couldn't afford to let him rattle her. Not here, not now. She took her place on the stage, her heart pounding as the moderator introduced her. Alyssa spoke with confidence and conviction, outlining her vision for the industry and emphasizing the importance of inclusivity and innovation. The audience listened intently, some nodding in agreement, others exchanging glances. She could feel the weight of their scrutiny, but she stood firm, refusing to let doubt creep in. When the panel ended, the room erupted into polite applause. Alyssa stepped down from the stage, only to find herself face to face with Harrington. "Impressive speech," he said smoothly, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "You certainly have a way with words." "Thank you," Alyssa replied evenly, refusing to let him see any hint of discomfort. Harrington tilted his head slightly, as if studying her. "You know, it's a tough industry. Not everyone has what it takes to survive in the long run." Alyssa met his gaze, her voice steady. "You're right. It is tough. But I've never been one to back down from a challenge." Harrington's smile widened, but there was something cold about it. "Well, we'll see how things play out, won't we?" Alyssa didn't respond, her expression unyielding. She watched as Harrington walked away, the air around him practically crackling with unspoken tension. She knew now that this wasn't just a professional conflict, it was personal. Harrington saw her as a threat, not just to his ambitions, but to the status quo he was so determined to protect, and he wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. But neither was Alyssa. She'd had worked too hard and come too far to let someone like Harrington dictate her future. As the evening wore on, Alyssa mingled with the crowd, making a point to connect with key allies and reinforce her position. Every conversation, every handshake, every carefully chosen word felt like a move in an intricate chess game. By the time she returned to her hotel, the exhaustion had set in, but so had a newfound resolve. She didn't know exactly what Harrington was planning, but she knew one thing for certain: when the moment came, she would be ready. Because Alyssa Carter wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for everyone who had ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told they didn't belong. And she wasn't about to lose. Alyssa barely slept that night. Her thoughts kept racing, and as dawn crept over the city, she knew that the battle she was facing was more intense than she had initially realized. The event had made it clear. Harrington wasn't just after her position. He was trying to rewrite the entire narrative of the industry. Her focus on diversity, on breaking down barriers, was something he saw as a threat, not just a challenge to his authority, but a threat to his carefully curated world of power and privilege. The next morning, just as she was finishing breakfast in her hotel suite, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Marcus. "Asterisk, you need to come to the office right now." "It's bad, asterisk." Her stomach dropped. Without hesitation, she grabbed her things and headed to the company headquarters, her mind already racing through the possible scenarios. What could have happened? Had someone leaked information? Had Harrington made his move already? When she arrived, the atmosphere at the office was tense. Employees were whispering in hushed tones, exchanging worried glances. Alyssa could feel the weight of their eyes on her as she walked through the corridors. Everyone seemed to know something she didn't. Marcus was waiting for her in the conference room, looking grim. He didn't even greet her, just gestured for her to sit. "Alyssa," he began, his voice low, "I've been looking through company records, and I found something that doesn't add up." Alyssa raised an eyebrow, a knot tightening in her chest. "What do you mean?" "It's not just Harrington and the board. Someone inside the company, someone close to you, is working with him." Her breath caught. "What?" Marcus pulled out a set of documents and laid them on the table. "I found a series of emails between you and a senior executive, one that you trust. It looks like they've been feeding Harrington information, helping him undermine you from the inside." Alyssa flipped through the papers, her heart hammering as she scanned the content. The emails were carefully crafted, detailing her plans, her meetings, even private conversations she'd had with colleagues. The name at the bottom of the emails was one she never expected to see: Cynthia Reynolds, one of the senior executives who had been with the company almost as long as Alyssa had. They had worked together on countless projects, always with a sense of mutual respect and trust. But now that trust felt like a cruel joke. Why would she do this? Alyssa murmured, the disbelief clear in her voice. Marcus shook his head. "I don't know. But the timing of these emails is too suspicious to ignore, and it gets worse. Alyssa looked up at him, her mind already spiraling. What do you mean? I've also found documents showing that Cynthia's been in talks with other companies. Big ones. Ones that could potentially offer her a leadership role if they're successful in taking down the current management. She's not just working with Harrington, she's betting on his success. Alyssa's mind reeled, the full weight of the betrayal sinking in. Cynthia had always been a loyal ally, someone who had never shown any signs of discontent. She had even been a vocal supporter of Alyssa's initiatives, advocating for change from within the company. But now it seemed all of that had been a facade, a way to gain Alyssa's trust before delivering the ultimate blow. Alyssa stood up abruptly, the anger rising in her chest. I can't believe this. She's been playing me from the beginning. Marcus sighed. I know it's hard, but we need to face the reality. This is bigger than just Harrington. If Cynthia is involved, it means there's a group working against you from within, and they're playing a long game. They're willing to destroy everything you've built to get what they want. Alyssa paced the room, her mind working in overdrive. She had always believed in transparency and trust. She had fought hard to create a culture where loyalty wasn't just a word, but a value that everyone held dear. Now, that very culture seemed to be crumbling around her. The walls that had once felt like a fortress of support were suddenly closing in on her, with enemies on both the inside and the outside. Her phone buzzed again, interrupting her thoughts. This time, it was a news alert. Board votes to restructure leadership amid controversial shift in company direction. Alyssa's blood ran cold. She opened the article quickly, scanning the details. The board had called an emergency meeting, one she hadn't been informed of, and a motion had been put forward to restructure the company's leadership, citing unforeseen challenges and differing opinions on future goals. The article didn't directly mention her, but it didn't have to. The timing of the vote, combined with the language of the motion, was clear. They were making a move to replace her. How long do we have? Alyssa asked Marcus, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. It's already happening, Marcus replied, his eyes grim. They're voting today. If it passes, he'll be out. They've got the votes lined up. Alyssa felt the room spin. It was one thing to face external challenges. It was another entirely to realize that the people you had worked alongside, trusted, and helped build up were now turning against you. The betrayal was worse than she could have imagined. I need to see Cynthia, Alyssa said, her voice cold and determined. I need to know why. Marcus frowned. Are you sure that's a good idea? We don't know where her loyalty really lies. You might be walking into a trap. Alyssa squared her shoulders, the determination in her eyes hardening. I've come this far because I've faced challenges head-on. I won't back down now, not without confronting her directly. With that, she left the room and headed straight for Cynthia's office, her mind racing with questions. She knew she had to act fast. The board vote was happening today, and if she didn't get to the bottom of this betrayal, she might not have a company to fight for. As she reached Cynthia's office, the door was slightly ajar. Alyssa pushed it open, only to stop in her tracks. Cynthia was sitting at her desk, but she wasn't alone. David Harrington was there too, standing by her side, a smirk on his face that sent a chill through Alyssa. Ah, Alyssa, Cynthia said, looking up with an expression that was almost too calm. We were just talking about you. Alyssa's heart dropped. This was it. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and she was about to find out just how far the betrayal ran. Alyssa's mind raced, her body stiff with shock as she stood in the doorway, the weight of what she was seeing crashing down on her. Cynthia and Harrington exchanged a knowing glance, their conversation abruptly stopping when Alyssa stepped forward. Well, isn't this a cozy little meeting? Alyssa said, her voice deceptively calm. Cynthia didn't flinch. Instead, she folded her hands on the desk and looked at Alyssa with an unreadable expression. I think it's time we talked, she said, almost sympathetically. Alyssa clenched her fists, her thoughts whirling. So, this is what it was all about. You and Harrington have been plotting against me from the start, haven't you? Harrington chuckled, his smile sharp. You're a smart woman, Alyssa. Too bad you couldn't see what was happening under your nose. Alyssa felt a cold anger rising within her, but she held her ground. What exactly is your plan here, Cynthia? Are you really going to throw everything we've built together down the drain for a shot at power? Cynthia's lips curled into a small, almost regretful smile. It's not about power, it's about survival. You've changed the company, sure, but not everyone agrees with how you've done it. You're shaking up the very foundations that keep people like me safe. Safe, Alyssa repeated incredulously. This isn't about safety, Cynthia. It's about greed, about clinging to the old ways when the world is moving forward. You had a front row seat to the progress I've been trying to make, and you used that trust against me. Cynthia leaned back in her chair, unbothered by Alyssa's words. I didn't have a choice. The board was divided, and I had to make a decision. This is bigger than you and me. It's about the survival of the company itself. You can't possibly believe that destroying me is the answer. Alyssa shot back, her eyes narrowing. Harrington stepped forward now, his tone dismissive. It's not personal, Alyssa. We did what we had to do. You weren't going to survive the storm you created. We were just trying to guide the ship back to calmer waters. Alyssa's gaze flickered between them, piecing everything together. This wasn't just a power play. It was about control, about the corporate system rejecting her vision for something more inclusive, more forward-thinking. And Cynthia, the one person she'd trusted to help steer the ship, had been leading her into the storm the entire time. But just as the realization hit her, her phone buzzed again. This time the message was from Marcus. Check your email, Alyssa's pulse quickened, and she didn't hesitate. She pulled out her phone, quickly scanning through the message Marcus had sent. It was a forwarded email, this time from someone in her own legal team. The contents made her heart skip a beat. The email outlined a series of highly confidential discussions that had been happening behind the scenes, discussions Alyssa wasn't aware of until now. The company, in fact, hadn't been divided on her leadership. Quite the opposite, the majority of the board had been secretly backing her. But someone, likely someone in Cynthia's circle, had carefully orchestrated the leaks to make it appear as though she was losing support. Alyssa's mind raced. This was a setup. A brilliant, calculated move to destroy her credibility. She looked back at Cynthia, her voice shaking with fury, but tinged with triumph. You didn't think this through, did you, Cynthia? You thought you were playing both sides, but you were the one being played. Cynthia's eyes flashed for a split second, but she quickly masked it with her calm exterior. What are you talking about? Alyssa stood straighter, feeling the surge of confidence that had been absent for so long. You thought you could take me down by manipulating the board, but you forgot one thing. Marcus has been gathering evidence, and now we have the truth. The board isn't divided at all. You're the one who's been playing both sides, and now everyone's going to know it. Alyssa hit send on her phone, forwarding the email from Marcus to a secure list of the board members and key executives who hadn't yet been swayed by Cynthia's manipulations. In a matter of seconds, the entire company would know what had really been going on. But as she hit send, something unexpected happened. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it wasn't just a message, it was a news alert. Alyssa's eyes widened as she read the headline. Alyssa Carter exposed in insider trading scandal. Her heart stopped. The article went on to accuse her of using her position at the company to funnel information to outside investors, giving them an unfair advantage. There were screenshots of text messages, calls, and even an anonymous whistleblower claiming to have witnessed her actions. Alyssa's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a smear campaign, it was a full-fledged attack, timed to perfection. They had been setting her up all along. Harrington, seeing her reaction, smiled coldly. Did you really think you were the only one who could play this game, Alyssa? You've been so focused on exposing the betrayal from the inside, you didn't notice the bigger trap closing in. Alyssa felt the ground shift beneath her, the weight of the accusations sinking in. Was this the end? Was everything she had fought for, her career, her reputation, about to be destroyed in an instant? But just as the doubt began to creep in, another message appeared on her phone, this time from someone completely unexpected, the company's lead investigator. Asterisk, the investigation into the whistleblower and the claims against you has been concluded. There's no evidence linking you to the trading activities. It was all fabricated. Asterisk. Alyssa blinked, reading the message again, barely able to process the relief that washed over her. The whistleblower's story had been a lie. Someone had planted false information to frame her. "Your move, Harrington," Alyssa said, her voice low and steady, feeling the power shift back to her. Harrington's smirk faltered, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt passed across his face. Alyssa wasn't done yet. She had the evidence, the truth on her side, and now she was ready to fight back harder than ever before. Cynthia's face went pale as she realized the trap had been sprung. The game had changed. With one final glance at her betrayers, Alyssa turned and walked out of the office, her phone already buzzing with new messages of support from the board. The battle wasn't over yet, but the tides were turning in her favor. And this time, nothing was going to stop her. As Alyssa walked out of Cynthia's office, her heart still pounding, she felt an odd sense of clarity wash over her. She had taken a punch, but she wasn't out. She wasn't even close to being finished. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Marcus. "It's over. The ball was on your side. They've confirmed everything. Cynthia's gone. You've got the votes," he texted. Alyssa paused in the hallway, taking a deep breath. The tension in her chest loosened, but only slightly. She had won, but the battle had taken a toll. The scandal, the betrayals, it had all been so much. It was only now that she realized how deeply it had affected her. But there was no time for reflection. She had to finish what she started. Within hours, the news broke. Cynthia Reynolds was removed from her position, along with several other key figures who had sided with her. David Harrington's role was under scrutiny, though the weight of the investigation had shifted from Alyssa to him. What had seemed like an unstoppable force a mere day ago was now a crumbling empire. Alyssa couldn't help but feel a rush of vindication, but it was tempered by the realization of how close she had come to losing everything. If it weren't for the swift work of her legal team, the support of Marcus, and the unexpected turn of events with the whistleblower, she would have been painted with a scandal that could have destroyed her career. In the following days, she met with the board, face to face this time. The room was filled with familiar faces, but the dynamic had shifted. People who had once been quiet were now speaking up in support of her leadership. The votes had been stacked in her favor, but it wasn't just about the numbers anymore. It was about trust, about rebuilding the company from the ashes of the conflict. She had to prove to them, and herself, that her vision wasn't just about diversity or progress, but about strength, resilience, and the ability to lead through adversity. As the meeting progressed, Alyssa stood at the front of the room, addressing the group with the calm and conviction that had carried her through this storm. "I know these past few days have been difficult for all of us," she began, "but we have to remember why we started this journey together. This company was built on the idea that change is inevitable, and we can either fight against it or embrace it. We've chosen to embrace it. We're not just a business, we're a community. And that's why we have to keep pushing forward, not just for ourselves, but for the future of this company." The room was silent for a moment, then several board members nodded in agreement. Alyssa could see the change in their eyes, a shift from skepticism to belief. They were with her now. They believed in her leadership, in her vision. Marcus was at her side when the meeting ended. As they walked out of the boardroom, he gave her a smile that spoke volumes. "You did it. We did it," he said. "The company's future is in good hands." Alyssa's smile was small but genuine. It felt good to hear those words, especially from Marcus, who had been her rock throughout everything. She knew she couldn't have gotten through this alone. But even as the dust began to settle, there was still something lingering in the back of her mind. A question that she couldn't shake. She had won, yes, but at what cost? How many people had been hurt in the process? Had the company been irrevocably damaged by the infighting and chaos? That evening, as she sat at her desk in her now empty office, she allowed herself a moment to reflect. She thought of all the people who had stood by her, who had fought for the change she had believed in. She thought of the employees who had supported her initiatives for diversity, the ones who had worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make her vision a reality. But she also thought of Cynthia, of the betrayal she had felt. How could someone so close to her, someone she had trusted, turn on her like that? Alyssa had been a part of the company's culture, and Cynthia had been a key figure in shaping that culture. So why had she gone down this path? In the end, it wasn't just about winning the battle, it was about understanding the deeper issues at play. Alyssa realized that people like Cynthia weren't just motivated by power. They were afraid of change, afraid of losing what they had worked so hard to build. It was that fear, that insecurity, that had driven her to betray everything they had worked for. But Alyssa had learned something invaluable through it all. Leadership wasn't just about standing tall and being unshaken. It was about being adaptable, about listening and understanding the fears of those around you. The next day, Alyssa made a decision. She called a meeting with the company's top executives and a few former allies from the board. She didn't want to be the CEO who pushed people out. She wanted to be the one who could bring people together, regardless of their past mistakes, regardless of their fears. She wanted to create a culture that would foster collaboration and growth, not just competition and hierarchy. "I want us to move forward as a team," she said in the meeting. "No more divisions, no more distrust. We can make this company a place where every voice is heard, no matter their background. But that starts with us. We have to be better for each other and for the future of this company." The meeting was tense at first, but as Alyssa spoke, as she laid out her vision, the executives began to listen. She could see the change in their faces, the same way she had seen the boards change.